light within my heart, light within my thoughts, light within my words. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be. Welcome. I am Sister Who. I describe myself as a 21st century nun doing the work of a nun, supporting others' personal and spiritual growth in any way I can, making extensive use of symbols and metaphors. Because this show originally began as a public access television show in Denver, Colorado in 1992, quite a long time ago, 27 years at this point. The evolution of technology, I guess, has brought us to the point where there is now a YouTube channel, and a great many of the episodes, not all of them, but a great many of them, are now on the YouTube channel, going out everywhere the internet reaches, all the way around the world. Which means that in recording these shows in English, that means that the show is going lots of places where the people can't understand what it is that I'm saying. But I still get responses from people who I'm not sure really completely understand the show, but they talk about the effect that the show has on them. And I have to wonder if in some ways I am, by doing these shows, singing my songs occasionally or talking about different topics or different challenges, that a lot of people have commented on the tone of my voice, for example. And what I was trying to get at is to say that sometimes I wonder if just through the tone of my voice or the way, my posture perhaps, that I'm communicating a presence of peace and love and spirituality and faith perhaps. And that in the world within the world in which we're currently living, there are a lot of places where faith has diminished and people have difficulty having faith even in themselves, much less in anything spiritual or unseen. And I don't want to digress into, is there a God, is there not? I think for the moment, believe whatever is empowering to you. And if somebody else believes something completely opposite, allow them the freedom to believe whatever they find empowering. Whatever makes you a wiser and more loving person. If one of the purposes I can serve, however, is to be a presence of gentleness and kindness and love and faith, then even that may be empowering to viewers who may not be understanding the exact words that I'm speaking. And even that may communicate something beyond words that is empowering to them. I'm reminded of a performance I saw, many, many years ago. And I apologize that I can't even remember what the story was. I just remember the effect it had upon the audience. It was in a church. It was someone who was a mime. And I'm trying to remember if there was any music playing in the background, but I don't think there was. From the time the introduction was given by the minister, who sat down, the mime moved to the performance area and began acting out a story, a very long, complex story that took perhaps a half hour to perform. During that entire half hour, there was not a single sound. It was a story that was inspiring and instructive and insightful, and it was performed with such precision and such detail that everyone quickly understood exactly what was happening, what the progression was, the plot twist that unfolded, and the resolution at the end. And this mime, I would say, was very much within the realm, the spectrum, the broader spectrum of the sacred clown. of which mimes and koshari and heyokas and court jesters and all sorts of other names are examples. Very specific and very precisely defined examples. Within that broad arena of sacred clown, Sister Who is one, this mime was another example, and at the end of it, it was absolutely perfectly silent. Not a single sound had been made for a half hour. And everyone was so mesmerized by this intense performance, by this mime, who had not said a word. And at the end, the resolution was performed. The mime turned to the audience and bowed and left the sanctuary, and left the sanctuary, left the stage, left the performance area. And the minister stepped up and began speaking to close the service. And it was almost jarring to suddenly hear a human voice after such intense concentration on what the mime had done. And yet, because of that intense concentration, I have a hard time believing that everyone in the audience sitting in the pews did not leave that service, leave the church that day, a changed person. That in some way their sensitivity, their understanding, their perception had been altered and in a way empowered. But of course, in what specific way it empowered each person probably varied from one person to the next. But the performance was amazing because there was not a single sound. There was only one performer. There was no language. It was all movements and gestures and symbols. And yet it was movements and gestures and symbols that were understood by the audience. And so in that sense, the sacred clown would have to know in some way what sort of context, what sort of situations the audience would understand, and how they would interpret a particular movement, that without knowing sign language, without using the sign language that is used by people who are deaf, understanding would be conveyed. Which I guess is where I would say that the mature, seasoned, well-trained, veteran sacred clown would have that kind of vocabulary of movements and symbols and metaphors to draw from in creating a performance that could teach something to an audience that they may have forgotten, they may not have learned, they may have grown up in a restrictive environment that granted them no exposure to those sorts of things. And in that sense, it also raises the possibility that after that performance, the members of the audience were having conversations at local coffee shops and restaurants. What did it mean to you when he did this? What did it mean to you when this happened? And by comparing notes, learning from each other, because very often the best resource we have is each other. The point of that, though, because not every sacred clown is the embodiment of a presence of faith and love. But the point of that to me was to underscore how, as Sister Who, I can be the presence of that, and because of the symbols and metaphors that I use, I may be communicating with people in other countries in ways that create understanding without language and without words. And so in that sense, perhaps I should take a hint or a clue from that mime performer and incorporate many more things within my shows that use symbols in an active sort of way, so that if I have to demonstrate something for someone in another country who does not understand my words, how would I convey that? How would I communicate everything that I'm now saying without using a language that has to be learned? If there are people in other parts of the world who are illiterate, even in their own language, then they may get something from the tone of my voice. They may interpret something from the symbols on my set, the context in which I'm making this recording. Whether it's the candle or whether it's having a religious sort of attire, a ritual garb, as I often call it, and having it be in a different and new and yet approachable way. The sort of way where you can ask questions, you can communicate things, you can send online messages, and I do my best to pay attention to those and respond to them. But even when we don't have language, to know that we can still be together and that there is an emotion or a sense or an awareness that passes back and forth between us. And I'm honored to serve that as well. And if that can give somebody the strength and determination to keep going in the most discouraging circumstances, when no one around them is loving or kind, to be able to tune in to an episode of Sister Who Presents and find someone who is loving and kind and generous as much as resources allow, at least. And I hope that in setting the example, more people will begin to follow it, and humanity will evolve toward symbiotic relationship where we all do a much better job of taking care of each other. And I guess that's where I could try to measure myself by the profit, but every time money becomes the measure, community always suffers. So I try not to measure myself by the money, but then someone would say, well, how about measuring yourself by the response? Well, I read a number of years ago by someone who was involved in advertising that the assumption is generally made that for every one person who responds, 10 people didn't. Well, if that means that I get no response, it still means that there could have been 9 people's lives who were profoundly changed for the better. And if I trust that those 9 people are real and keep doing whatever I can do, then there is still meaning and purpose in the ministry of Sister Who. And every elderly person I've ever met insists that life is too short. How did I get to this point so quickly? And so because of that, it brings me back to saying that every moment that I can empower as a presence of faith and love, and if there's any wisdom in anything that I share, that becomes an empowered moment that might help that person get more out of life than they otherwise would. And if that is the purpose that I'm serving, that tells me that I need to keep making these shows as long as I have the ability, as long as the camera still works and the computer still works and the lighting equipment still works and a place to put up my set is still available. If I were to wind up homeless, obviously this set wouldn't be available, and the electricity for the camera wouldn't be available, and the electricity for the lighting wouldn't be available, and there would be no way to continue making shows. But I have had so many people over the years plead with me to never stop, and so it is my intention to never stop. Not because I think I'm more special, but because on the off chance that I might be the presence of faith and love and truth and honesty and decency for someone, I need to continue being there so that those things can continue to manifest within his or her life. The other part that's mixed up in that, of course, is trying to demonstrate as clearly and as articulately as possible exactly what love is and what it is like and what love is not. that when people say, "Oh, I love you," and then they don't do anything to back it up, to be patient with that, because they may be way at the beginning where love is only measured by those kinds of donations, but it's not, I guess, what I would call symbiotic. Mature love, in my opinion, is symbiotic. It's where each one is helping the other. It's like the illustration of heaven and hell as a long banquet table with wondrous food on it and people seated up and down both sides. But everyone seated at this table has a wooden spoon tied to their arm so that they cannot bend their elbow to feed themselves. They can only feed the person on the other side of the table. And in heaven, they feed each other, and they're happy and filled with joy and engaged in relationship. And in hell, they sit there glaring at each other, refusing to feed the person across the table because of some circumstance, such, well, you didn't take care of me, so I'm not going to take care of you. And all the while they're holding grudges, of course, they are turning what could be a joyful banquet into a depressing sort of hellish experience of everyone going hungry instead of reaching across the table to feed the other person, because you cannot feed yourself, and trusting that that person or someone will respond by feeding you. I am trying to remain a person of faith and understand that even when no one is feeding me, my job is not to keep score, but my job is to keep giving as long as I have the strength and ability to do so. I don't want to look back at the last 5 years of my life and remember all the times that my trust was abandoned, and when I sowed good seed, so to speak, but didn't reap a good harvest, when I was generous and gave something to someone in need, but then in my hour of need no one gave me anything. I've said it before, and I'm sure I'll say it again numerous times in the future. No one has to be only the sum of all the good no one has to be only the sum of all the bad things that have happened to oneself throughout one's life. Instead, one can choose to show the world what kind of person I am, and if that means giving attention to someone who refuses to give attention to me, it's not about whether or not they returned the favor. It's about whether or not I demonstrated the kind of person I am. And so I have to keep reminding myself, when I'm standing this close to reality, and when my face is being rubbed in something really, really unpleasant, and I'm standing too close to my own situation is what it comes down to. And in that moment, to remember to be a spiritual person who is not limited by time or space, and who doesn't need to punish the person for being less spiritually evolved, or for being someone who is victimized, who hasn't learned how not to be victimized by that, who hasn't learned how to not keep passing it along. And so on one hand, I'm trying to be patient with them and let them do their growing, trusting that someday, possibly after I'm gone, but someday they're going to figure it out, and they're going to learn how to draw something good out of what was initially a negative memory. But until that time comes, that they can still find something like Sister Who Presents on YouTube.com, and through my shows find something that empowers them to be more wise and loving, and to persevere just when it seems like nothing is working. That at that point especially not to give up, as a friend said, don't leave 5 minutes before the miracle happens. I'm hopeful in all of this, though, that I am offering some insight into what love is and what peace is. Peace is not just the absence of conflict, it's also knowing that one's needs are being met and will be met, and that love is not just romantic feelings or things that feel good. Love is equally something that transforms both the giver and the receiver, something that brings healing to both the giver and the receiver. When I can be the presence of love and faith for people when they don't have enough faith to have a faith of their own, and yet in a sense, it's like they have faith because Sister Who has faith. Or they may not have faith in any church, but they have faith in Sister Who. And I thank you for that if that's the case. Being the presence of love and faith in a world that has lost faith in itself, lost faith in each other, lost faith in our governmental systems, lost faith in everything. If I can be that presence in some limited way, I'm happy to do that. I am just hoping that whatever I present will also be adaptable and applicable to whatever local circumstances the viewer may have. That it is not that anything I say or do within this show needs to be taken exactly as it is, but that perhaps something I offer here may provide a spark of genius, some personal ingenuity, some creativity of your own, to take what you see here and apply it to your own life and discover your own creativity. That as love and faith come together, new possibilities emerge into view. And that anything negative you see around you doesn't have to have the last word. And that anything negative that happens in your life or to one of your loved ones doesn't have to be the last word, but you can immediately tell yourself, this is just the middle of the story. We've still got a happy ending to write. And if we work together, I think we can write a better one than if we try to do it all by ourselves. And I hope that those sorts of broadly applicable understandings come through this show somehow. That in spite of the limitations of my knowledge and the distance between us, there can still be something that makes life a beautiful and wonderful and expansive place to be. When one is busy being the presence of love and faith, of the presence of goodness in the world, it doesn't matter what you say or do as much as it matters what you are. So often we look at the words or the actions, and somewhere even beyond all of that is the identity of the person. Someone that may be having a wonderful effect upon our lives just by being there. And in a similar sort of way, someone else who may find that the reason they can continue persevering through their struggles and challenges is because of the wonderful people in their lives, one of whom happens to be you. And they may never tell you, but you not being there will still make a really big difference to them, because of the love and the wisdom and the kindness and the consideration that you have the ability to bring, because of your own inherent qualities of being a person who believes in working through problems, of being a person who can play music, of being a person who loves them enough to give them a hug. Any number of things. It could be absolutely anything. It could be opening the door for them, not because they don't have the strength to do it themselves, but because you think that they are a very important person and treat them as such. And when they believe that they are a very important person because you believe they're a very important person, better things come out and come through their life. Thank you very much for watching. And now may you be blessed with love and peace in the pursuit of your own dreams and in all your dealings with the diversity of humanity around you. May one and all and everything, blessed and loved, ever be.